Storytime doll. I, 23, female, used to work nights at a tiny no-name hotel in a small town. Needless to say, I see a bunch of weird shady stuff on a daily basis, but nothing could have ever prepared me for what I would see on the night I quit. I wasn't even supposed to be working, but someone else called in sick, and I stupidly agreed to cover the shift. I still have nightmares about everything that happened that night, and I was diagnosed with PTSD. It started out like any other night. I was at the front desk organizing check-ins and check-outs for the next day when I started to hear a weird noise coming from somewhere. It kind of sounded like someone trying to speak with their mouth covered. At first I tried to ignore it, but then it started to seem like it was getting more desperate. I stood up to try and figure out where the sound was coming from, and at that very moment, a guest came into the lobby. I was so distracted by him, mainly because he was acting really weird, that I didn't notice the noise had stopped. Usually when someone comes to the desk, it's because they need something, or they've locked themselves out of their room. But this guy seemed like he just wanted to talk. He asked me how my night was going, and if I had seen anything weird. I almost mentioned the noise I was hearing, but since I couldn't hear it anymore, I didn't bring it up. This guy kept looking around, as if he was waiting for something, but when I asked him if he was looking for someone, he got angry. At the time, I thought it was so strange, because up until then we were having a normal pleasant talk. Looking back at that moment, I realized how much danger I was actually in. He grabbed my arm, pulled me forward, and told me to mind my elfin business. Of course I was feeling all sorts of things because he was touching me, but something much worse was going on underneath the desk. I could feel someone grabbing my legs. I don't know why, but in that moment, I knew I couldn't under any circumstances let the man in front of me know what was happening underneath the desk. I calmly apologized and asked him if there was anything else I could do for him. I was so relieved when he started to walk away, but I knew when he was out of sight, I would have to come face to face with whatever was under my desk. When I finally gathered the courage to look, it took every bit of strength not to scream. I knew right away I couldn't do anything to cause that guy to come back. There under my desk was a girl about my age. Her face was covered in exaggerated makeup, but it almost looked like she was actually made of glass. I was so confused by what I was seeing that I reached out to touch her face, and when she didn't flinch, that's when I saw it. Her eyes were perfect, almost glass-like, and she didn't blink once. I helped her up, led her to a back room, and called 911. Before I knew it, the lobby of the hotel was full of police and paramedics. I had to go with the officer to open the door registered to the weird guest, but when we got up to his room, the door was wide open. He was nowhere to be found. As soon as I got back to the lobby, the girl wouldn't let go of my hand. Even when I tried to tell the girl that I couldn't go with her, she wouldn't let go. I ended up in the ambulance with her, and I'll never forget everything they said she'd been through. Her eyes were glass. Whatever was there before had been removed. Her makeup was permanently attached to her face with layers and layers of superglue. The overly fluffy skirt and shirt she had on had been sewn in place, and I just knew that guy was out there somewhere looking for his next doll. Storytime dog. If you're ever out alone in public parks or on trails, always pay attention to your surroundings. I never felt unsafe doing this, but after today, I don't think I'll ever be the same. I was at a park not too far away from my house that has 3 or 4 trails. I started walking around one of the trails that was open and not really covered by trees, but it was really crowded. I had just had a huge fight with one of my friends, so I wanted to be alone, but I didn't realize being alone would put my life in danger. I decided to try one of the more covered out of the way trails, and I was right. I couldn't see another person in either direction. It was a pretty easy trail that just went in a basic circle, so I decided to just stay on it. After about 15 minutes of not seeing anyone else, I could see someone walking towards me with a dog. The area I live in is pretty safe, and I felt fine at first, but as we got closer and closer to each other, I started to feel sick to my stomach. I could have either turned around or kept walking towards the person, but I didn't want to turn my back to them, so I kept walking forward. My stomach was in knots when I realized it was a guy twice my size. It was literally just him, his dog, and me. I couldn't see any other parts of the park, and I knew if I screamed no one would hear it. As we passed, I tried to force a smile, and when he smiled back I stupidly relaxed a little, but being relaxed wouldn't last long. We made eye contact and I just knew I was seeing real evil. If I had any doubt, what he said to me made it super clear. It all happened so fast, but as we passed I smiled and said hi like I've done a million times before when you pass someone on a trail. He smiled back and said, "You have a beautiful neck." I was so taken off guard that I actually said thank you. I knew I needed to get back to the main part of the park as quickly as I could, but I didn't know what to do. Keep walking forward knowing he's behind me, or turn around and follow him. I decided to walk a little bit and then turn around so I could see him. At first this worked out great. I felt safe and kept my distance, but I could see him. He never turned around once, or even let me know he knew I was there. Then out of nowhere he did something I was completely unprepared for. Right before he turned the corner, without any warning, he took off running at a speed that made my stomach drop. I just stood there and watched him disappear. Instead of walking in the direction he took off, I turned around and walked back the opposite way. I walked for what felt like forever, and I didn't see or hear anything, so I started to feel better. I thought maybe he was gone, and I was overreacting. But then I rounded the corner of the trail, and what I saw made my heart stop. There, in the middle of the trail tied to a tree, was just the dog. Storytime close. So now that this is all over, and I know it's impossible for anyone reading this to make the connections, I can talk about it. I've been a professional at what I do for a long time, but there was one guy who almost put an end to my career. This was about 10 years ago when I was working almost every week. I met a guy, we'll call him 32, and I loved that he had long flowing hair that passed his shoulders. We talked a little bit, and 32 mentioned that he was a huge animal lover. As soon as he said it, I knew I found my way to get him alone. I tried to be as casual as I could, and asked him if he wanted to come back to my place and meet my dogs. Without any hesitation, 32 jumped up, grabbed his coat, and started walking towards the door. I couldn't believe how easy he was making everything, but I knew it would make the realization of his situation that much better. We got to my place, and I'm always worried that I won't get people through the door because of the smell. But even though he made a face, he strolled right through the door. They always go inside even though it smells like their future. I closed the front door behind us and watched as 32 looked around for signs of dogs. I could see the panic all over his face, but he did a pretty good job keeping it together. I told him the dogs were in crates at the back of the house and pointed down the hall. I knew he had to pass the room where I keep my favorite parts, and I knew he would see it. It's always so much fun watching them pretend they don't see what's in the room. But 32 stopped in his tracks and turned towards the room. He surprised me and sprinted towards the front door, but I didn't panic. He would realize all the locks needed a key. After that, 32 and I had all the fun I could stand, and like everyone before him, I took my favorite parts: an ear, a beautiful eyebrow, and a tattoo from his calf. I wanted to take his beautiful hair, but something inside told me to leave it, so I did. I took 32 to the spot I brought everyone before him once I was done, and while I was digging the hole, he jumped up and ran towards the road. I was so surprised it took a second for me to start chasing him. I didn't think I would be able to catch him before he made it to the main road, but then there it was. His long, beautiful flowing hair. I grabbed it just in time, but it was close. Storytime screams. 4 years ago, my sister met this guy named Jeremy. He wasn't the most good-looking guy ever, but she told us his family was wealthy. At first, we thought he was full of it, and my sister was blinded by the possibility of living the good life. But soon we would know for sure just how much money he had, and we would also know that no amount of money would ever be worth the things my sister went through. At first, Jeremy spoiled my sister, and he spoiled us. He would send us all on trips, and he would get us designer stuff for Christmas. I have to admit that he was a little controlling. He did things like buy my sister 2 phones, so there was never an excuse for her not to answer his calls, and I'm pretty sure he was using them to track her, because he would always just show up places. My sister and Jeremy dated for 2 years, and they definitely had their ups and downs. I'm not proud of it, but we all encouraged her to work it out because we wanted to keep going on nice trips and getting nice things. But if I knew everything I know now, I would have told her to run and never look back. There's so much I wish I knew, but when Jeremy told me he was going to propose to my sister, I was beyond happy. It was an amazing wedding in Italy. We were all invited, and everything was paid for and taken care of. My sister and Jeremy went on a month-long honeymoon traveling all across Europe, and I have to admit I was kind of jealous. It wasn't until a year later I would find out there was absolutely nothing to be jealous of.